Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into yoga philosophy and how it makes your life better. Subscribe to the podcast. Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast. I'm sitting with my co-host, Stephanie, and today our guest is Alix Jean, who's an acupuncturist and lover of all things TCM. And so we're so thrilled to have you on our podcast today to kind of counter. We've been talking about Ayurveda this whole month, and we wanted to bring in a different aspect of the healing practices from the East. And so we thought no one better than you. And so welcome, Alix.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
So Alix, we like opening with 3 semi-random questions for our guests, just so our listeners can get to know you a little better. I also didn't send you these. These are a surprise. These 3 questions. So the first one is, what era would you live in if you could choose any era?
Ooh.
And why?
I mean, ancient China is kind of an obvious one. Always been really drawn to like Scotland, medieval Scotland. I don't know if I have probably heritage there. Yeah, those are a couple that come to mind.
Cool. What are some things you never leave the house without? And if you could name 3 physical things and 3 things in your mind or your heart. So 3 physical, tactile, and 3 abstract.
Well, my triad, cell phone, wallet, keys, pretty like obvious.
Yeah, for sure.
Like I always have a deodorant in my bag.
Oh, good one.
Yeah, I always forget to even use that in the morning. And and then what do I bring in my heart? Was the other part? Okay. Like, how do I say, like a pause? Like a beautiful, like an openness.
Yes.
Hope to keep like a space without judgment at all times. Appreciation of beauty. I feel like that one's always like just, I don't know, always been like a daydreamer. Just staring at the clouds or something. And what else?
Those are beautiful.
Yeah. That's what's coming to me.
I think that's perfect. That's perfect.
Okay.
Okay, last question. What's your superpower?
It's funny, I had one a while back. Can I come back to it?
Yeah,
it comes to
totally.
me.
Yeah,
These are like totally off the cuff.
And I feel like it'll probably also come out as I think we start talking, as we start diving into
with that in
your
mind.
passion, which is acupuncture. Yeah. So Alix practices a different kind of acupuncture than I feel like most people, or at least what I've done. So practice Japanese acupuncture versus Chinese. And so I'd love you, if you could, to define what is acupuncture in terms of a practice, and then what is the difference between Chinese acupuncture and Japanese acupuncture?
Yeah. Good question. So it's kind of hard to, like, I feel like probably within both of those definitions, there's so many nuances that this is a little bit like tricky to just define, but I could give some general kind of definitions. Absolutely. And then within that, there's probably a ton of kind of variety of practice. So in my own little corner of practice, I feel like most of your listeners know a little bit about acupuncture. Like it's pins, right? It's points in the body to stimulate healing, something like that. So, yes. So in Japanese, I guess it's all just down to different lineages, and then how, like, throughout history, how sort of these classic texts were I guess, interpreted and then put into practice in different ways. And yeah, so we have TCM, traditional Chinese medicine, and that's what all acupuncturists are trained in the West. Like that's our governing boards, like our governing body. And then the Japanese is a little bit of like some extra techniques, I think, of on top, like in the way that I've learned it. So it's some extra trainings that I've taken. And the major differences, I guess, would be more focus on palpation. And it's sometimes called Japanese meridian therapy because the focus is on like the lines, right? The connective tissue, and we call them the meridians in the body.
Yep.
And
so how would we define meridians?
Yeah.
Or how would you define meridians?
Okay. So in Chinese medicine, or the way we, I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, so in Chinese medicine, we have the meridians, which are like lines in the body of qi flow or energy flow, or however they are defined. And there's kind of 12 main ones with the corresponding internal organs, right? And they go like all throughout the body, which in Western medicine, I would say like neuromyofascial. It's like, it's the connective tissue, it's the nerve function, it's maybe like bioelectric kind of activity, all of these things that can be measurable, and there's like many different ways to measure them, I guess. And then each meridian corresponds to an internal organ. So for example, the lungs are in my chest, but the lung meridian goes along the arm. So I might actually kind of assess, maybe there's some lung symptoms happening, and then check the meridian for points that are tight or tender, or like actual like nodules or changes within that connective tissue. And then those are points that I would kind of work on within the acupuncture session. And so, Chinese medicine, they do have those meridians, right? Like that's a big part of what we learn in school, for sure. And then sometimes the diagnosis goes a little bit more straight to what's going on in the organ. And then there's a point prescription for that. Like, a certain set of points that has these functions, almost like there's a certain set of, like a herbal formula that has these functions. Versus Japanese, there's a lot more space to maybe say, oh, it could be this point, it could be this point, but let's like check it out based on touch, I guess.
Okay. So you're exploring more, like it's more tactile.
Definitely more tactile. A lot of practitioners will pop the pins in and kind of leave the room and wait in traditional like Chinese medicine. With Japanese acupuncture, I'm in the room the whole time. I am checking, rechecking, I'm assessing based on the abdomen. It's called Hara diagnosis. And that's a system of reflexes which tells me which points to do. Yes. And then the sort of beautiful part about that is there's like a moment of feedback where the patient on the table knows, as well as generally like we both can feel a difference. What was tight or tender releases in the moment. So that's like a key kind of difference. For me as a practitioner, that was like so much information and so much like feedback that was really useful. Where in school, I felt like we would do the full assessment, figure out this point prescription even before touching the person at all, pop the points in, right? Like do the treatment and then leave and then wait and see. And then it's like, oh, well, how do we know that was the right set of points? And then we go based on patient report, right? And there are other ways that a practitioner could know, like not touch, but maybe based on the pulse, we do a little bit like observation as well, right? Like even the color in their cheeks has changed, or like you can see them breathing deeper, and all of that's part of it. But this, to me, the Hara diagnosis, is it tight or tender there? That's a reflex that says, okay, something's blocked. And then if we can release that in the moment, we know for sure. Like, I guess I just liked that immediate feedback.
Yeah. And then it's also like literally your gut is telling you whether or not it's working.
Hara meaning center. So literally, your guts, right? And then if we think about in Western medicine, how much of our nervous system course, like responses are subconscious, right? It's tapping into that. So yeah, and that's a really fascinating piece too, is sometimes people are extremely aware of every single reflex, and then sometimes I'll be palpating their abdomen and say, oh, okay, there's something a little, like a bit of a nodule here, a little bit tight, a little bit something, and I ask the patient if they can feel the difference, and sometimes like not at all. So that's, I think, where we're tapping into the subconscious that they're really not aware of. Yeah.
So it's kind of like I feel like it's kind of like magic, like, or not magic, but there's like a part of it. I mean, I don't know. To me, it sounds like it's kind of exciting because you're in there in the moment. You might have a sense of like where it's going to go, but you're not really sure. And so, you know, you kind of connect with their Hara, or they connect with it, and all of a sudden, something shifts, or you know, or sometimes it doesn't, I guess, maybe. And I mean, that hour, like there's layers, right? Like I could almost say like, oh, I know there's going to be this reflex, like this kind of aspect to clear, and then what's going to be underneath, like I don't even know, right? So especially like an initial appointment, people do say like, oh, that's like magic, like so I'll literally have two hands on the person, right, and check their abdomen, and then okay, that's something there, and then I'll put my other hand on a point, just an acupuncture point that's maybe on like the limbs, and if the abdomen changes immediately, they go, what? Like, and then you say that word, like, is it magic? And it's not. It's our nervous system, right? It's, I mean, maybe you could say that it is, but it's in the body. It's a physical response. And I guess I'm, what's the word? Like evidence-based. Like I like that immediate feedback. And I like that it shows patients that as well. So, it's got to be gratifying.
It is. It's super good.
One thing I'll say,
patients say like, "Oh, you're totally nerding out on this," and like they can tell how much I love it.
Well, Alix, that's why I wanted to have you on the show, because I've taken both kinds of acupuncture, traditional Chinese, and a session with you. Only one, unfortunately, because of COVID and what's going on right now. But I loved how involved you were in it. You gave me so much information in the only session I had with you, and the only word I can think for it is it's very intimate, because you do stay in the room, which for me was a little bit weird at first. I was like, oh, I'm not going to get space to just like open and relax and have the music and the aroma in the room and do my own thing. But once I got comfortable with it, and
I would say that's a good point. There's some moments in time where I could tell like, oh, that person probably like things are rolling already. Like I don't need to keep fine tuning, right? So yeah, definitely. With that said, like initial appointments, that I tend to warn people, there's a little more poking and prodding, because then I'm checking into all your reflexes, getting all that information, and then from there, just like treating the points, checking back, treating a point, checking back, like all this kind of fine tuning. And then the moxa is like more hands-on therapy with the heat application, right? So I guess just to back up though, that's my experience of Japanese acupuncture. I don't know for sure if that's how everyone would practice, but yeah. So based on palpation, that's a big one. The Hara diagnosis.
That's so cool.
And a gentler needling, usually very smaller needles, couple of millimeters.
Like thinner needles?
Thinner.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Thinner. And there's even techniques of Japanese acupuncture that are non-insertive. So I don't practice that, but like you could just use your hands, like just pressure on them or on the points without pins. So all these different varieties, which I'm sure is true of Chinese medicine as well. Like you could have practitioners who really kind of get in there, and then some.
Yes, and some who are much more gentle.
Yeah, because in my experience with you, you're saying that just the hands, you're reminding me. And just to give context, I had a frozen left shoulder from a rotator cuff injury in yoga. And I had gone to, I think I was teaching and ran into a friend, and I was so upset and I couldn't move my arm. I had no feeling in my left hand. And Carolyn, she's a previous guest on the podcast. Alix, you were in town from Victoria for a weekend, and she was like, here's her number. You should contact her and see if you can get in. And so the next morning, that's what I did. I booked, I think it was 8:00 on a Saturday. And so my left shoulder is frozen. I had no feeling in my left hand. You were palpating my stomach and putting pins in my feet.
Oh.
And that's what released my shoulder. It blew my mind. It was like, and that was the point around the intimacy of, you stayed with me and you were doing a lot around my stomach, and you were asking me about my gallbladder, and then doing a lot on my right foot. And it took like some time for my whole shoulder to relax, but I had feeling in my hand when I left. And I remember being so blown away that the stomach and my right foot were linked to my left shoulder. Like,
right.
That is magic.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's something I encounter a lot in clinic. Just like, I think about the amount of people who come in with neck and shoulder stuff and headaches, right? Like,
yeah, I was going to ask you, like, what's the biggest thing people come with? Neck, shoulders, headaches.
I mean, stress related things in general, I would say,
Yeah.
Hormone kind of issues, and chronic injuries, back pain, lots of pain stuff for sure, lots of kind of mental, emotional stuff, and hormones. Those would be big ones. But that is something I hear all the time, is like, it hurts here. Why don't you put them on my shoulder? Like, why don't you put them there, right? And yeah, that's part of it. Like, I usually say, I call it root and branch. So that's a classic part of Chinese and Japanese acupuncture. We look at the root, and, if the roots are strong, then it'll nourish the branches, right? So we don't need to treat the branches then necessarily.
Yes.
But if the Hara, if the center, the root is clear, then we'll look at the branch. If it's still needing that local treatment, then I might kind of go for the local. And it can feel really nice to get local treatment too. Like, I'll do that sometimes. It just depends.
Yes.
Sometimes the branch is so loud that you just need that relief, right?
Yes.
So, but definitely it's something that people are consistently confused about when they first start to see me. She wasn't listening at all. Like, I said, my head hurt, and she's going to my ankles. Like, what?
And the idea is that you're essentially touching those meridians, like those root points are further away from the branches. Like, so say like someone's feeling it in their neck and you do it in the feet. Is it literally because you're going to the root of that meridian?
Yeah.
Okay.
We call them the yin meridians. So the sort of deep inner, like the cooling, calming, grounding, sort of deep organ functions. Like, a lot of those meridians start like from the feet and go to the head, right?
Yes.
So clearing sort of the yin lines, the deep inner ones literally from the ground up, then we would get potentially like a much better release once we get to the top.
Okay.
So, and I think about too, like, I always go back to more of like a physical, like a physiological response.
Yes.
And how much of our neck stuff is from posture, like the way we sit.
Yes.
What's the spine doing? And then take out the seated posture and all the issues with that. But then what about how we're walking, right? And literally like the heel strike to where the toes are falling, and how much that can be kind of imbalanced. And
it essentially ricochets all the way up the spine.
Exactly. Yeah. Gait issues, right? That throw off the shoulders, like throw off the hip. Hip alignment to shoulder girdle to neck, and then you notice it in the neck because that's where it's like trying to correct.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like the lightest point.
A direct, whiplash injury or something, then that's a different story. But often it's like ground up.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, what is the difference between chi and energy? Some people define them as the same, some people don't. So just curious as to.
Yeah. So I guess, the direct translation in the textbook in Chinese medicine school, right? Like they don't translate qi. They just keep calling it qi because there's no perfect translation.
Okay.
Because energy sounds a little bit more intangible almost. And we could think about what energy means in English too, is like, is it heat? Is it light? Is it wave? Is it particle? Like, we don't have, it's all those things, right?
Yes.
So I know, like, in your podcast, you're talking a lot about kind of subtle energy, like
Yes.
this almost quantum physics idea, like something that's
Exactly.
intangible.
The vibration.
It's like vibration, sent through the air. Like, it's not necessarily tactile. And in Chinese medicine, I feel like it could be both. Like, one translation is oxygen, or so it's tangible, but it's not. Is it a molecule? I don't know. Like, how do you know it's there? Well, you see it, you feel it. It's life force, right? Like, everything alive has it. But in what form? I don't know if I could say.
Right.
So,
Interesting. That's cool.
Yeah, that's great. That's really good. Thank you for that.
Yeah, I remember one teacher being like, "Oh, how do you know there's chi?" And he waved his hand, like, "There it is." you see it, you feel it, because we're alive. But that's
Yeah.
So I think it's a good distinction, because when we talk about energy work, sometimes we have this idea of hands off, or something that's above the body, or like a Reiki idea. Yeah. And for some practitioners in acupuncture, that might be how they envision it. And for some, it's very much, it's like neurological, it's myofascial. It's, acupuncture is a really interesting one, because it's so kind of running that in between of accepted in modern Western medicine and woo-woo,
esoteric,
right? Like, it's all
totally.
It can be either.
I love that you're bringing it into the fascia lines, because even I've been thinking it more in terms of subtle, because we're talking about Ayurveda and Reiki and yoga, the chakras. It is more subtle energy systems, but when you say fascia, that takes me right into my body, and it gives a more tactile example for someone who. And there's a lot of people who come to yoga like this. They want the science. They want to know, like, okay, this breath work is palpating my lungs and affecting the capillaries so I can breathe more. And like with fascia, I'm thinking specifically of the one that I've heard cued in Shirshasana, so head on the ground, the fascia line from the big toe to the top of the throat. So you put your tongue on the top of your throat as you reach your toes up towards the sky, because you're trying to connect the fascial tissue from the ground all the way up to the toes. So all of a sudden it gives this really physical expression to something that is, woo-woo and ethereal. And if you're not speaking the lingo of chakras and whatever, that probably goes right over a student's head. They're like, I'm not hearing you. I don't understand that language.
Definitely. Yeah, it brings in belief system, which is great if that's your belief system.
Yes.
And it's potentially not inclusive if it's not, right? So I've had a patient kind of come in, and she came for a consultation because she wasn't sure she wanted to book. And she said, I've seen a lot of the Buddha statue in acupuncture clinics, and I'm not Buddhist, so I wondered if I can get acupuncture.
Great question.
Oh, didn't occur to me that felt non-inclusive, right? For someone without that belief system. So of course, like, I see why that would be a question. And for me, like, acupuncture isn't just for people who use the energy like language. So, and it'll have the same effect regardless of your belief system, right? Like, it's so that's where I like to keep it. Talking about even meridians, I'll say, okay, but what this means is neuromyofascial lines, like the connective tissue, and how your nervous system and how your muscles integrate that. Like, so enough tension in that line and you get pain. And so that palpation of your abdomen that feels a little bit tight or tender, that's just because it's holding along that line. So if I can release from a distal point, like, your nervous system says, okay, we can like unwind this.
Alix, how did you get into acupuncture?
Great question.
Let's see. I was in university, actually. I found it kind of early, well, not like in childhood, but like late teenage years.
Yes.
And I was in a car accident, and that was like a big kind of life changer for me. It was
Yes.
kind of intense injuries. And then I was also studying psychology at the time, and health psychology in particular. So I'd say I was already interested in that area. And
Yes.
then through my own injuries and my experience of healing and not healing, and what that felt like, and definitely the link between physical and mental health and emotional health, and just kind of not feeling like all aspects were addressed. Like I had been through a shock, and I tried acupuncture, and definitely was immediately like, oh, this is so much more relief than I felt.
Yes.
And yeah, I just started learning, and that was it.
Okay, and then you were hooked.
Yep.
And so, what would you say is your favorite part about treating people?
Well, it's obviously so rewarding to see people getting better.
Yes.
Like, that's the most gratifying thing in the world, I guess. Like, just, you can see in the moment, like, that's the Japanese part, right? Like, these aha moments that they might be having of, like, you get that sigh that happens potentially, halfway through the session, where their whole system is just like, didn't need that anymore, right? And I honestly feel like it's humbling, it's honoring an honor to be witness to that.
Yes. I feel the exact same way in terms of teaching. It's like those moments when you see people, for me, it's like when you can feel them like drop into their bodies and like feel their bodies, and or when there's that moment where they can appreciate their body. Because I find sometimes, like, people, I'm sure they walk into the clinic the same way as they walk into a yoga class. Like, they've come from, 15 things that happened that day. They're like thinking about the things that need to happen later, and it takes them like 15 or 20 minutes to kind of to drop into the moment. And then all of a sudden there's this like almost like energetic hum that starts happening. Maybe that's that idea of the sigh. And that's like my favorite, like probably one of my favorite parts about teaching is just watching people like, like drop in, and then there's like a that kind of happens in their bodies, and then you're like, this is the best job in the whole entire world. I love what I do for that reason. It's so gratifying to see. And then for people, the other one is when they come out of Shavasana for me, and I wonder if it's like when they come off the table for you, and they have that like mild stoned, like very like hopefully like quiet, like there's a peace. And you're like, oh, it's just the best. The best.
Yeah, we call it acu-stoned.
Oh, nice. Yeah, we call it yoga stoned.
Yoga stoned? Yeah.
Exactly.
That's cute. Acu-stoned. I like that.
Yeah. What would you... go ahead, Steph. Oh. No. Yep.
Well,
go get him, girl.
I have a question. If both of you can answer, speaking in terms of acupuncture, and then Clara for yoga, like what... the effect of the nervous system and fascia, because I think, and especially like coming from where I was probably 5 years ago when I started more alternative practices, thinking like, oh, it's my muscles. Like I think there's a misinterpretation around misconception. Thank you. Like you want to treat the gross system, gross as in the external, the bigger muscles. Like if I have pain in my back or my neck, I'm like, oh, it's the muscle, obviously. But it's usually more subtle. And this is where we start tapping into different energy systems. And two of the biggest ones that have been in my lexicon, just studying probably the last 2 years, is the nervous system and fascia. And I didn't even know what fascia was until I took a special YTT and got this book by Tom Myers, and it blew my mind. I was like, oh, I didn't even know this existed, and it's huge. And the poses we do, the effect on the fascial lines.
Do you want to, Steph? Do you want to define what fascia is for our listeners?
So fascia is the connective tissues between the muscles. It's the encasing that wraps the muscle. So you actually
wraps actually everything.
Okay, so
not just
great.
muscles.
See,
It
I'm
wraps
learning.
organs. It wraps everything.
Right.
You got
And
it.
then the lines go like your back fascia line goes from your heel to the back of your head. So like I've gone to classes where they're targeting the back line. So you'll do opening along the back of the legs, the back, the neck to just lengthen everything. Clara, you're right. The muscles, the organs, everything opens. And you actually can't get to the muscles without going through the fascia.
Yes.
Like the fascia is the first point of contact. That blew my mind when I learned it. So maybe Clara or Alix, if you want to start, like around more like nervous system and fascia and what occurs in the practices that you teach and how you try to access these systems or educate people who come with questions.
I'll hit it up first. Yeah. So one other thing that I loved learning about fascia that I thought was so cool is I heard someone describe it like a sausage encasing. So that's to think of fascia is not just around your muscles, but literally encases everything that is inside of you. And so what will naturally happen is as you stretch your body and or if you start to massage it or put needles into it, you're always affecting your fascia. And so no matter what you do. So I thought that was a really cool I thought that was so cool to think about. And so specifically in yoga, just quite simply moving our bodies, like, and specifically in vinyasa yoga, like when we start with the sun salutations, right, that is not only warming up the muscles, but it's actually starting to stretch the sausage encasing known as your fascia, right? And because why that's so important is, at least for yogis, is that the more space we have in our sausage encasing, the first part is the deeper we can breathe. Or that's the way that I think about it, is because especially when I was teaching in New York City, like people breathe so shallow in New York because everybody is so contracted because they're running 50 miles an hour towards, like they're moving at such a fast rate that you can only you have to hold everything in really tight in order to move with that much velocity. And so at least for me, just stretching my body allowed me to breathe deeper, which then changed on a neurological as well as physiological level, right? The deeper you breathe, you're changing your heart rate, you're changing your brain waves. And so that, to me, that's why I think yoga is so amazing, is like you don't have to tap into any of the woo-woo stuff. Just quite simply breathing deep and moving your body is going to create such a big change for everybody. Right? Something I'm like constantly obsessed about is like the 3 rhythms in our bodies, right? Heart, breath, and brain waves. The more that we work with one of them, they all change. And so like just on a purely like physiological level, it's like what we're doing by breathing and moving is we're changing our whole, like right down to the molecules. We're changing it all, like we're literally shifting ourselves. And that is, to me, the most empowering part about any kind of mindful practice, including the healing arts, of we can create change in our body so that we're no longer a quote unquote victim or like a passenger in our life. We are the driver.
Great. That's such a powerful statement.
That changed,
wow.
like, yeah. I'm
Mic
like,
drops. We're done.
That's hard to follow.
I don't know how I like got very passionate about it, but it's true, and I feel that way also, like in terms of my experience in acupuncture and massage. All of that is like having somebody help you to create change. At least for me, I used to feel like life was happening to me instead of me participating in it,
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, definitely. A couple little pieces that like I just thought of like as you were speaking, just kind of to add to it, like why would it show up as back pain or like a tight muscle?
Yes.
Right? Like Steph, you said you felt it's a tight muscle kind of thing. And just neurologically, when we feel pain, it's typically more of a warning sign than a sign of damage. Right? So if you were to stretch to like 90% of your capacity, it starts to hurt, then your body would say back off. Right?
Yes.
So same with the Hara diagnosis, with the palpating the injury, the tight, the tender area. It's tender because it's held, And that's your system's warning sign. Like there's this layer of guarding the area, which if we can release that whole line, that whole meridian, then we get release like all the way through. We get relief of the pain without touching the area. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then it's kind of the same. And that's why, in my mind anyway, that's where when we're looking in Chinese, Japanese medicine at the organ function, because we're often treating like endocrine issues or your gallbladder qi we talked about, right? Then it shows up as congestion of the fascia around that organ. And so that's something I always want to kind of distinguish for patients. I'm like, oh, there's something up with your gallbladder meridian. Not to say that your organ has any issue. It might, but this is like way preventative, and it's about the connective tissue around that organ, and it's about the nervous system input to that organ. So so that congestion of maybe just a little bit of constricted blood flow or a little bit of less shallow or more shallow breathing in that area would maybe 30 years down the road lead to an overt pathology, but this is where it's very preventative. And this is where like you can change that state kind of just with the deep breathing, the yoga, like the insertion of tiny points, right? Like it's just malleable still, and it's like warning signs. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And there is stuff that you can't fix with like just a physical practice on your own. That is why I sought out an acupuncturist and my masseuse years ago. And I'm thinking like, I didn't have this, but my masseuse was telling me that sometimes fascia will get so tight, it'll actually stick to the organ. And then you're stuck. So like even hearing both of you in terms of like breath and needling and making space, like we can become so tense and lose our malleability that our organs are sticking to our muscles. Like that sounds so painful, and it's not uncommon is what I was told anyway.
And you actually might not feel it at all. That's another, is like sometimes it's a warning sign of pain, and sometimes it's like numb, kind of numbed out. Yeah. So
what do you think would be, that's a beautiful segue in terms of, we've been asking all of our practitioners this month of like, what could people do every day as like a preventative that would help like keep them to the best ability in homeostasis, meaning, at a place of like normality in terms of in the tradition of TCM or with the specialty of Japanese, the Japanese lineage, like what are 3 things people should do every day so that hopefully they don't have their organs sticking to their to their muscles.
That's what everyone's gonna walk away from this talk.
Sausages and
sticking to your organs.
I'm a sausage.
Go see Alix before it happens.
I think, 2 thoughts. One is with Chinese medicine, it's a lot based on observations of nature.
Yes.
So every day, like it depends on the day. Is it a yin kind of season, and should we be going inwards, or is it a yang season and more like outwards kind of thing? So there's no one sort of.
All right, so this time of year, so in November, which I feel like is yin.
And if that person is very yang, like always on the go, like your New York kind of constitution, right? Then maybe they need a little more introspection, a little more silence, a little less movement. And then at the same time, movement is so healing as well, right? Like helping that unwinding. So for your yin type who tends to just kind of go inwards all the time, then maybe they need a little more activity. So I find it a hard question. It's always about balancing for the constitution, like the yin and the yang and the hot and the cold and inwards and outwards, like kind of activity. So yeah. So
all right. So I'm going to say, I'm going to say, Alix, November, like here in the Northern Hemisphere, we'll even say in the Pacific Northwest. And for a yin person versus like a yang person, what are a couple things that can be helpful every day?
Yeah. Like movement every day.
Okay.
In some form. And then with the fascia, it's not just about movement either. There's like we call them neuro-emotional, right? Like the meridians also hold an emotion. So, so some form of introspection, some form of movement, like, you know, you're in yoga, it's the asanas and the meditation, right? So yeah, and those, the emotional holding, I think it can be like more, like as much as, if not more than like a physical injury, right? Like, so
I wanted to ask about the emotions in the organs if we have time. So I'm just tickled that that's the direction this is going. If you can speak to the each of the organs and the emotion that they represent in TCM. I love this.
Yeah, definitely. So I can do broad strokes because I could talk about this all day. Cool. And I do. But okay, so we've also got the element sort of correspondences in Japanese, Chinese medicine. So back to that yin and yang, right? The yang is like all things upwards and outwards and heat, and there's a masculine connotation and like summer, right? And then the yin would be the inwards, the contracting, the deep, the dark, like the abyss, kind of the water. So we've got fire and water polarity. Yes. And then all the other, like the phases, or they call the phases or elements, they're not like a static state, they're movement. So liver would be more springtime, the wood element, which is like what wood does in the spring. Everything goes up and out and forward, and it's about growth and leadership. And the emotion that corresponds is anger often. And we hear these kind of simplistic, like anger, joy kind of idea, but really, if the energy of upward and outward and growth, like that's a really positive thing, right? It's just once, like if something's in the way, there's something impeding, then we get frustration or anger, right? But it's not like a bad emotion. It's just can be used in positive or negative ways, I guess. So yeah, the liver meridian and the gallbladder meridian, there's this energy of up and out and forward and growth and drive and goals. And then that moves into fire. Fire is summer. Yeah. And then we have like joy and kind of heart centered, just like expression and love and passion. Yeah. And then we have pathologies of every aspect, right? Like you could potentially have too much joy, which is like chasing joy, chasing like almost like a drug addiction or like cocaine kind of idea. It's like, right? Like really up and fiery. Like that could be too much of a fire kind of pathology. But then we can have just like pure expression of joy as well. And that's not going to be like burning us out necessarily. If that makes sense. Yes. With me so far?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Totally with
absolutely.
you.
Yeah. And then we're into the season we're in now. So fall, right, is coming back into yin time, or I guess, autumn. Earth element is, it's not any one direction, like up or out. It's actually coming back into center. So just like our digestive organs are in the center of us. That's earth elements, very like grounding, stabilizing, about nourishment. And the emotion that's corresponded, again, like there's a negative connotation, which we usually say of it, but it's neither good nor bad in itself. It's just like, is it in balance? And it's like worry or overthinking. Okay. Like we nourish, like a classic mom kind of pattern is like caretaking to the point of not caretaking for oneself, right? Always just giving. So it's giving in balance. It's kind of earth energy. And then autumn is fall, contraction, yin time. And it's an interesting one because it's like going in as well as down, almost like the sap of trees, and then letting go of what's not necessary anymore. So like the leaves just fall away, right? Because they're done with like letting go of what's going to, sorry, my cat, decay. And then retaining what's most valuable, what's most, of metal season is very valuable. Like what's the most value for us?
Yeah. In TCM, you guys have metal instead of ether, right? In terms of the fifth element?
Yeah, I'm not as familiar with the 4 elements. I always try to map those on, and it throws me a bit. It's all metaphor, right, too?
Completely.
So, yeah, the ether is it metal, I suppose?
I think ether is metal, but they don't connote to the same thing, but I'm pretty sure that the 5 elements in Chinese, you don't have ether or space, but you do have air.
We don't have space, no, but we have wood.
Yes, wood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then water, probably very similar. Right?
And fire.
Winter.
Fire and earth.
Yeah.
We have those, we share those 3, and then I feel like then it veers off to metal and wood, I feel like, for Chinese medicine, right? And then for Ayurveda, it's air and ether.
Right. Same with talking about the, what do you call them? The doshas?
The doshas, your constitution. So the constitution, exactly.
So we have like maybe the 5 main constitutions with their organs.
Yeah, so in Ayurveda, it's 3 main constitutions that comprise, that are made up of 2 of the elements, are kind of in each of the doshas. And so that makes up your constitution. Though you have all 3 in your makeup, it's just one is more dominant than the other, which I think is also the same in TCM. Has been my experience. Our last question on this is my question to you is, how many sessions does it normally take for somebody to kind of get through either an injury or, when people come to you, how many sessions does it normally take?
Oh yeah, that's a hard question.
I know. That's why I'm asking.
I usually tell people, let's try a couple and see how your body's doing, and then go from there. I'm actually really bad at putting people on treatment plans, mostly because I find they don't follow them anyway. Yes. But it really depends on the person, the constitution, what else they're doing, what's the underlying. So I use the example of car accidents because that's my experience. There tends to be physical, mental, emotional components, right? Yes. Even if it's not this overt, I could never get in a car again, there's a layer of, ooh, this is so sore, I'm afraid to move it. That kind of thing, right? Yes. Anything with post-surgical or pre-existing mental emotional conditions, I don't know if I want to use the word trauma, but little t trauma even. Yes. It's a memory that's held deeper, almost. Yes. So if you got someone, I use the example of sports injuries, they bounce back wildly fast to me. I'm always amazed. It could be one treatment and they're up and running, right? Yes. And then if there's a held component in the nervous system, like a belief, yes, it can be a lot longer, and that depends on the person too, right? If they're doing whatever other self-work, meditation, yoga, feeling into it, allowing that versus it's so subconscious. I don't want to say this in a blaming way either. That stuff's hard. Yes. If it's a held belief or a held experience, it can be really little bit by bit that the nervous system feels safe to release. And that's where if we start to do a deep, intense needling right into the area, that doesn't feel safe to your nervous system, right? Yeah. So it's not going to hold anyway. No. If, great, you get that, I don't know, range of motion through the shoulder, and inside your body's saying, hell no, this doesn't feel safe, doesn't feel good, can't breathe through it. It's not doing anything positive. So it's always about getting that nervous system on board. And that's, yes, I think another part about tuning into that palpation kind of touch base, are the safety reflexes, we would call them Xiaoyang or Shen, the spirit points, are those moving? Because if the nervous system's not on board or the spirit's not on board, then nothing else is going to change. So yeah.
How do you say that? Xiaoyang? That's beautiful.
Oh, Xiaoyang. It's Chinese medicine lingo for maybe the sympathetic nervous system.
Okay.
Whoa.
Yeah. Xiaoyang.
Yeah, I've actually
Anyway.
I generally never go to acupuncture for like a physical, for physical problems. I actually go, I call it my energetic tune-up. I usually see my
Right.
acupuncturist like a couple times a year, and I don't go for anything. I like for anything in particular. I just like to have that kind of like, it's, yeah, I call it the energy tune-up. And so
Yeah.
I book them like every season or something. And then I'm just like, do what you think needs to happen. And I
Perfect.
found that that's also, like, kind of like, just because I do work with my body and I love my body. So I want to, I kind of just do these sessions. So that's also something I also wanted to put out to our listeners is like, you don't also need to go to have like a particular reason. Sometimes it's actually nice. It's a beautiful way of self-care to have someone kind of massage, energetically massage. And with Alix, she does give you palpation, which is a physical massage, to just have that, yeah, I call it the tune-up, the energy tune-up. And so, so I would recommend sometimes going to healers, not necessarily to heal something very big or large, but as a preventative to
Yeah, that's a
kind of check
great
in.
point. Thank you for saying that. I think
Yeah.
that's a great, when people come in saying that, like, I don't know, whatever you find, just, I'm like, great. Because there's something's going to be loudest, right? And
Yes.
and then it just allows me to like let your body do the guiding versus
Yes.
people come in saying, well, it hurts right here. This is what I need released kind of right now. And I'm like, well, yeah, depending on how much else you're ready to kind of get into, like that will release more or less, right? So, and I get it too. Sometimes people need that like symptomatic relief.
Yes.
I was
Steph?
talking to someone yesterday and we were discussing the difference in we were speaking specifically to yoga, but you could say like in therapy or acupuncture or Reiki, like insert any modality. The difference of meeting the person you're treating or creating the experience for versus forcing them into something.
Mm-hmm.
And like I'll speak specifically to yoga just because it's my primary practice. I can feel a difference as a student between the teachers who are they're kind of pulling you through something. It's like, this is the lesson plan. These are the, like if you think about the Ashtanga series, like it's a sequence of poses, they're just guiding you through, versus when you enter a space and the teacher's really listening, like they're there and they're watching the bodies and they're listening to the breath and they're kind of guiding and creating based on what the room is saying it needs.
Mm-hmm.
There's a deeper listening. And I think it's the same with with acupuncture and any practice that, Alix, you just said it, like you're listening to see what comes up, and then you're responding. It's responsive. That's the word I'm looking for. It's responsive.
Mm-hmm.
And so because of that, I feel like that's the gift of it being a co-creation. Like that's to me where the magic is, because you or me as the teacher, I'm sure Alix, you feel the same way. Like we have a sense of where we're going to go, but it really is like the exchange of energy and ideas, not necessarily like verbally, that creates the healing in the moment. And so you don't know what's going to happen, which is like, to me, the best part about all of it. Like that's the magic, is because we don't know. Like you have a sense, but you're like, depending upon, what comes back to me from the other person or from the community of people, we're going to
definitely
move in a different.
I'm always blown away by the difference, like from person to person.
Yeah.
Some person will like going back to that, oh, it's magic statement. And it could be a first time, like they never had acupuncture before. They have no working knowledge of the fascia, the meridians, the organs, the emotions, like nothing. They're not like consciously mapping it on, but they're just like, whoa, my body's like, I feel that in my, my fingers are tingling, but you haven't touched my hands. It's like all this kind of stuff.
Yes.
And the next person, like, and that's fine. Like there's no right or wrong, but like the next person I could just check in, like any sensations, any thoughts, feelings, concerns, and like, nope. Like, okay. So yeah. And then they say it's magic, like when they feel that, right? But it's like, that wasn't me, that was you. Like, yeah.
Beautiful.
It's just witnessing what they're, it's facilitating. Yeah.
Thank you so much. for taking the time. This is that's a beautiful way to end it, is to the magic of co-creating healing space together.
And, well, thank you so much for having me. I feel like I could talk all day, so that, hopefully there's some clarity.
No, it was awesome. And so, Alix, you're based out of Victoria, BC?
Yes.
And are you seeing people in this wonderful time we're calling COVID?
I am, the clinic I'm at for my main gig, it's all kind of locked down, like COVID protocols, so,
Perfect.
Plastic furniture and the masks and all of the sanitizing, which we're pretty used to at this point, so yeah, definitely. I think people need a lot of support in this time, so it's good that we are able to stay open.
So we are going to we'll post where people can find you if they either live in Victoria or if they're moving through Victoria. Both Steph and I have had sessions with Alix and could not speak more glowingly about your treatments, and so we'd highly recommend them to anybody who's in the area. And I would say even for an energetic tune-up, you don't even necessarily need to go for something in particular, though if you do have something, that's always good as well. And Steph, always a pleasure sitting with you, sister.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, you're awesome. Thank you for sharing all your beautiful knowledge and your passion for the healing of people.
Good talking to you too.
Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast is brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation. I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.